Do you ever wonder if you've harvested your vegetables at their peak flavor? Well, 4 years ago, I started gardening with one goal in mind, and that is to grow the most flavorful produce possible. So today we're going to be covering the perfect harvest timing windows for summer classics like tomatoes, corn, melon, beans, and everything in between. And with summer in full swing, timing is everything. Wait a little bit too long and your harvest is going to be overripe. But harvest it a little bit too early and you're leaving a lot of flavor in the garden. But don't worry, because by the end of this video, you're going to have the confidence to harvest your vegetables at peak flavor that is so good, you can't put a price on it. When it comes to summer classics, watermelon is something I crave every single year, and Kevin has me beat this year on melons, that's for sure. So let's take a look at his and see if any of them are ready to harvest, and maybe I'll take one home for myself. Now, a couple things that you want to look at. First of all, there's usually a waxy coating on a watermelon. I could see a little bit of it here. And as soon as that starts to fade and it starts to become a little bit shinier, that is actually a good sign that the watermelon is actually now starting to become ripe. Now, if you're growing it on the ground, one of the most indicative things to look for is the field spot on the bottom. It should become sort of creamy yellow, off-white color. The deeper that color is, the better. But this can also be dictated by the surface you're growing it on, how wet it is, and what soil you have. So you want to try to combine as many things as possible. So the next one is to actually look at where the watermelon attaches to the main vine. There are usually two things there. First of all, if the tendril is starting to become brown and shriveled, or in fact is fully brown and shriveled, that is a pretty good sign. For some melons, that happens a little bit before peak ripeness, so you might have to play with it a little bit. But there's also something called a spoon leaf, which is a little leaf on the underside. Oftentimes it's already gone by the time the tendril is brown, so I wouldn't necessarily use that as your first instinct. Now let's talk about what you do if you don't have your watermelon on the ground, because I got a couple danglers on that side right there. The reason I'm bringing up these dangling watermelons here is because they will never get a field spot because they're not actually on soil and they cannot develop that yellow creamy bottom. So instead, what you're left with is the tendril, the spoon leaf, and the waxy exterior. This one has a little bit of that waxiness gone. Over here, where I think it was facing the sun the most, it's starting to become shiny. So I'm gonna go ahead and harvest this one. I have one underneath it that has the same conditions. So if this guy here is ripe, then the next one should also be ripe. So we already harvested that one. Let's go ahead and get this guy too, because it feels like it's ready. This one needs some time, but let me show you one in the back that is definitely not ready, and it's a great example. Most cantaloupe, including this Chardonnay melon here, will be what is considered a full slip melon. That is referring to the slip, which is the part where the fruit attaches to the vine. Now, the other thing I will mention is that you could easily take a look at the base of that slip where it meets the fruit. If it looks like it's fully continuous with the fruit, then it's definitely not ready. But once they are starting to become ready, you'll see a little bit of a crack forming around the slip and the vine there. And that is a great indicator that you could give it a little test pull. If it pops off easy, you're ready to go. Oftentimes it's hard to know whether your melon is a full slip variety. So what I would recommend is to look at the color originally, usually green, and keep track of that. Once that one is ready, it just popped right off. But the main thing you want to look for is that it's going from green to usually an orangish yellow color, depending on the variety. And when it's for sure ready, you should be able to go right up next to it, give it a deep whiff, and if it smells like you just cut open a fresh cantaloupe, that guy is ready to go, and it should be absolutely delicious. But let's take a look inside and see if we got these right. I'm gonna go ahead and cut it, and sometimes when they're really ripe, they will snap as you're cutting them. Ooh, man, that looks really juicy inside. Not really sure on this guy if it is actually ready. There's a little bit of yellow coloration, but it's also dependent on some of these melons, which are heirlooms. They're not bred to be perfect, so we'll do a little taste test on that one. This one is really sounding to me like it's perfect. So, yeah, so look right there. And when I started cutting it, this crack just happened. So my knife cut was here and it just split right open. So let's peel it open. Now that is oftentimes a sign that the melon is indeed ripe, or another thing that it could be is a sign that it is maybe a little bit overwatered. So the real test is the taste test. My God, that is so sweet. I love seeded watermelons. They're really hard to find nowadays. This is an orange variety, which was quite the surprise. I didn't realize Kevin was growing an orange variety, but this one's definitely ripe. It's crisp. You could hear it snap when I break it, and it is very juicy and sweet. Absolutely phenomenal. Something you cannot buy at the store. Now let's go ahead and try the other one that has the funky coloration to it. One thing that I'm noticing that's usually a sign of a melon being a little bit early are these little swirls here. You could see that it's almost like a geyser. It comes up and it swirls back on itself. That's usually an indication that this was a little bit early. Now, the thing that we saw though was that the tendril was fully dry, the spoon leaf was dry. So what that means is that this one needs to go past that dry tendril, and realistically, you'd probably want to wait for all of this kind of waxy material to disappear. But really, the taste test is going to be what tells us. Super sweet, really nice aroma, not quite as crisp as the other one, but that could be variety dependent. Overall, both of these melons were absolutely delicious, and I will be eating both of these as soon as I'm done here. But on this guy, I would actually wait until that waxiness fully disappeared instead of relying on the tendril. But the tendril is definitely a good starting point, and this is still a delicious melon. Now let's move on to the Chardonnay melons. Oh my God, that is a thing of beauty in there, guys. Right off the bat, I could tell you that they both smell really delicious and good, but there is something different here. This one that had the darker color has like more of a marbled, deeper orange color in here in the flesh compared to this guy here. Now I think both of them will be absolutely delicious. So let's give it a little slice, a little taste test. So this is the one that was riper. That's really good. That's also really good. Now that I've tasted them, I could tell you that this one for sure is sweeter, more perfumey, deeper flavor, and it is worth waiting for a slightly more orange color on that melon. Now, the one thing I will caveat and caution is that you always are sniffing them as you are waiting for them to ripen, because if it starts to smell a little bit rancid, a little bit putrid, you might have over ripened it and that whole flavor experience is going to be ruined. So it is really a matter of days, maybe one day before something is perfectly full ripe and actually overripe and not as good. So pay attention, but regardless, both of these are absolutely phenomenal. Now let's talk about corn, but none of our corn is quite ready yet. So let's take a look at my corn from last year and I'll show you exactly what to look for peak harvest flavor. So I have quite a lot of corn here. Most of it I'm going to be leaving as dry corn, and that's because I'm growing the Martian Jewels variety of corn. This is a type of corn you could eat as sweet corn, or you can leave it as flour corn if it dries fully. So for now, I'm harvesting a couple cobs to do sweet corn. And just for reference though, this is a type of corn that, although sweet, it is an old school sweet corn. So it's not like a crazy sugary sweet. It has a more kind of soft texture, a little bit more savoriness to it, but it is still a sweet corn. So I'm gonna peel this one open. I just already know that it's ready just because I've been able to visualize it. So here's a problem though. So right there, that is a corn earworm. So it has ate the top couple rows of corn. I'm gonna go ahead and toss that aside. And let me show you what the rest looks like. Now, again, I knew this one was ready just because I could see it on site, but I'll show you exactly what to look for after we take a look at this. So here's what we have left. This is the section that the corn earworm ate, and that's totally fine because here's what we're going to do. We're gonna get some pruners. I'm gonna come just about like half a row past where that damage is, snap it right off, and there we go. This is oftentimes why you see corn like this in the store. It's already pre-cut. And the rest of it is 100% fine, no issues whatsoever. So now, how do we know when to harvest this corn so it looks like this? And in case you're wondering, you can eat sweet corn raw, straight from the garden, and it's delicious. But don't eat too much because it is known to have a laxative effect. But munching down on at least one cob to enjoy the fruits of your labor is highly recommended. So here's our ear of corn, and the first thing you're gonna wanna look at is the silk. If the silk is nice and brown like this, then odds are that your corn is ready to go. Now, you don't have to entirely take the corn off to determine whether it's ready. What you can do is find one of these outer leaves and then just start peeling off one of them. You don't have to rip it. You could kind of try to ease it open. We are now looking at the inside of the corn. Now this is called the milk test. So when a corn cob is ready, the corn is fully ripe and at its peak sweetness, what you can do is take like a fingernail or just like a knife. I'll use a knife just to make it more obvious. So what you're going to do is poke one of these kernels, and if the juice is coming out white, so let's see if I can do that again. See how it's a little white there? That is a sign that the corn is ready. If it came out sort of clear and watery instead of milky and white, then that means that it's not ready. So in this case, it is ready. What you're going to do is just snap it down like that. And now the easiest way to process the corn is to just grab your snips or pruners. And then what I like to do is kind of feel down here to find where the base of the corn cob is, which is right there. I'll take my pruners and then just snip that off like so. That'll get most of the outer layers off nice and easy. And then what I like to do is come up to the top. There's that corn earworm damage. Snip that. And now you could store your corn just like this, or you could peel it. One thing that I wanted to mention about sweet corn is that when you harvest it, as soon as you harvest that corn, it is starting to degrade in the sense that those sugars in this corn kernel is going to quickly turn into starch. So as soon as you harvest your corn, you want to eat it ASAP. It's going to be the sweetest, most delicious if you eat it right away. If you wait, it'll get more starchy, it won't be as sweet. So I just recently got back from vacation only to find my tomato trellis here has collapsed under its own weight because I have not been pruning it and maintaining it. But the good news is that it's absolutely loaded with tomatoes. So I'm gonna pick a couple that are underripe and some that are full ripe, and I'll show you all the differences and which one I think is best. I wanted to show you guys the challenging tomatoes, things like the Cherokee Purple or this one here, Harvest Moon, which is an orange red tomato. These are the ones that are a little bit trickier to figure out versus just a red tomato, which is ready when it's fully red. So what are you looking for on something like an orange tomato? You're looking for deep colors on the bottom that are lightening to the surface, and it should feel a little bit soft at the top. That's how you know that it is fully ripe and ready to eat. Let's take a closer look at some of these Cherokee Purple tomatoes and talk about the different gradation of ripeness. Now, one thing I will mention is that if your tomatoes are like 50 to 70% of the final color, I would go ahead and pick them then. You're not going to lose any flavor by letting them ripen from that less ripe all the way to full ripe. It's really actually set at that point. It's just a matter of it reaching and developing those flavors from within. There are actually a lot of advantages to harvesting your tomatoes early. For one, it's not going to be as big of a target to pests like birds, rats, mice, you name it. They're less likely to eat a tomato that is green rather than one that is red. So picking it a little bit early will protect your harvest. The other thing is that during summer, it is hot and these tomatoes are ripening very, very quickly. You might have a tomato that's like 80% of the way ripe in the morning when you check on it. You go to work, come back 8 hours later, and that tomato could very well be overripe. And that's just because the heat is actually influencing the ripening, especially when it's outside on the plant. So in my experience, once you get to like that 70, 80% color range, you should just harvest it and bring it indoors. And when you do bring it indoors, make sure you store it on the actual shoulders like so, rather than on the blossom end like this. And that's because tomatoes ripen from the bottom blossom end up to the shoulders. So the shoulders will remain nice and firm during that ripening process, and you won't end up with a squishy tomato by the time you eat it. Now, if your tomato is 100% ripe like these guys over here, they are ready to go and ready to eat, then you should eat them. If you cannot eat them, that is the only time you will want to actually put a tomato in the fridge. Now hear me out. The reason why I'm saying this is because if you put that tomato in the fridge, the ripening process will essentially stop. Now, if it's full ripe and you leave it for another day, by the time you get to it the next morning, it could very well be overripe and actually a little bit disgusting and a little bit putrid tasting. But if you put it in the fridge and then you take it out when you're ready to eat it, let it reach room temperature, that tomato will basically have almost all of its initial flavor. And many people have tested this and found that to be true. So when it comes to knowing that a Cherokee Purple tomato is ripe, you're going to want to look at the bottom first. You'll see that there's a lot more yellow and green colors. As they ripen, it'll become more reddish, and then it'll eventually become more purplish, as the name suggests, in Cherokee Purple. Once you get to this stage, it should be good eating and actually quite delicious. But you could also experiment with eating it a little bit early or right up to full ripe, and you might enjoy the less sweet flavors on a slightly early tomato. It's all about experimenting and finding what you like, but the top should also have less of this green shoulder action, and it should start to have proper color. That's how you know something like a Cherokee Purple or a dark colored tomato is ready to eat. If you love growing fresh lettuce in the summertime just like me, here are a couple tips to pick it so it isn't too bitter, because the summer heat will make most lettuce bitter. Instead of waiting for the full head to form, you want to actually come out here and pick the little inner leaves, not the very, very tiniest ones, but the sort of mid-sized leaves off from the center. And you want to come through and just pick off as many as you need to make a salad. So you could grab like 2 from this plant, 2 from that plant, maybe 4 from the next. And what you'll have is tender leaves that haven't existed for too long in the summer heat, and thus they won't be quite as bitter. So don't wait for the full head of lettuce to form. Instead, just pick out a couple leaves as you need them. Trust me when I tell you that there are some actual nuances to harvesting summer squash or zucchini at peak flavor, because realistically, peak flavor is a spectrum of different use cases for your squash. For example, if you forgot to harvest your squash and you end up with a big boy like this, that's totally fine. You could split this down the middle, scoop it out, fill it with something delicious, bake it in the oven, and that bigger size squash is going to hold together a little bit better and retain its texture. They also tend to get a little bit sweeter at the bigger size, so it's fantastic for making things like zucchini bread, which everybody actually really truly loves. Now, the other thing I wanted to call out here is that you don't have to wait for squash to get really any size at all before harvesting and eating it. You could pick squash as baby zucchini like this guy here, there's a tiny little fruit and the flower is still attached. You could eat that entire thing and it's actually quite delicious. This is a great way to stop yourself from getting overwhelmed with giant piles of zucchini, because if you go out and you pick them at this size or this size, they're simply not going to have that much volume and they're going to be really tender, nutty, and delicious. So I prefer to pick them really, really tiny if I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed. Otherwise, I'll wait till about this size here, which is basically what you find at the grocery store, is a pretty ideal squash. Now, of course, this could get 25 to 50% bigger and still going to be eating just about the same. But once it gets any bigger than that, they're going to start to have some seeds develop, and that's when it's really best for baking or shredding to make other things with it. Now let's talk about eggplant. Eggplant is one of these interesting ones because it's actually surprisingly easy to tell when it's ready, and the main thing is how shiny the skin is. See how reflective and beautiful this eggplant is right here? This is an Asian style where they're more elongated, but this is true across the board for any style of eggplant you grow. When it's nice and shiny and reflective, it is ready to harvest, and you could harvest it young, a little bit smaller, it's totally fine, or wait until it reaches its maximum size. As soon as it starts to lose some of this shine and it becomes more dull, less reflective, that is when it's no longer ripe. It's going to start having seeds, it will be bitter, and it's just simply not going to be a very good eat. Now, the other thing you could do is give it a squeeze. If you give it, not even a squeeze, if you press with your finger like so, it should bounce back. If it doesn't bounce back, it's almost certainly overripe and it's not gonna be a good time. It will probably be bitter. So shiny, has a good bounce back, that is when eggplant of all types is ready and delicious to eat. I've gotta say, if there was one plant in the garden that offered the widest spectrums of flavors, it's gotta be the pepper plant. It is such a wonderful harvest because you could harvest things green or full color ripeness and everything in between and get a whole different world of flavors. Many people don't even realize this, but a green bell pepper is actually simply just a yellow or red or orange bell pepper that hasn't fully turned ripe. So you now have access to green peppers, red peppers, yellow peppers, orange peppers, all from the same plant. All you have to do is let them either ripen or reach that mature green state and harvest it then. Now, there is actually a too early time to harvest peppers because if they're just green and not even full green, like this one has started to break and change colors, so it's absolutely at the ripe green stage. But if you harvest them too early, they'll end up just tasting like you're eating some grass or leaves or just something sort of green. So experiment, but wait for a little color breaker like this if you want to get that green pepper from your own garden. It's going to taste much better than anything at the grocery store, and it won't be all bitter and weird. Now, there is another tip and trick when it comes to something like a jalapeno, so let's talk about that one next. First of all, I should just say that I think all peppers are best when you allow them to go full ripe, but when you let them go a little bit past ripe, they start to change in a way that, in my opinion, isn't as pleasant. So let's talk about the unique flavor spectrum offered from peppers as they ripen. When they are green, they tend to have more of that peppery flavor that you get from smelling them. So if you smell a bell pepper, that is pretty much what you're going to be tasting without any signs of sweetness. That is kind of the difference when it gets into that colorful stage. So these are the same pepper. This one obviously was left green with a little bit of color, and this one has now almost fully ripened and turned orange. This is going to be substantially sweeter, might even be juicier, might even be crisper, but generally speaking, green peppers are still crisp and juicy. They just aren't going to be as sweet. When it comes to spicier peppers, they will be spicy when they're green, and in my experience, they tend to get spicier as they ripen and darken and deepen in color. Part of that is because as a pepper is fully ripening, the walls will get progressively thinner and the flavor will become more concentrated. Now, the trade-off is that they won't be as crisp and juicy. So I like to harvest them a little bit before they go absolutely totally full ripe, because then they still have more snap to them. They're a little bit juicier, but I highly encourage that you experiment with a pepper plant, harvest some that are green, some that are half colorful, some that are full color, and some that are super dark, deep colorful. There are plenty of peppers on a single plant, so you have a lot of chances to experience the full gamut of flavor spectrum, and you could choose whichever one you like best. Now let's talk about a unique feature called corking. This is something that I see on a lot of different peppers, but in particular, jalapenos seem to always do it, and they are basically little lines, they're little squiggly lines or stretch marks that are sort of brownish, tannish color, and they run down the pepper. That is your sign that the pepper has gone from a underripe green, which might taste like you're eating grass or leaves, to a ripe green, true jalapeno flavor with all the spice and flavor aromatics in there. That corking sign is a sign of maturity. This will carry forward to something like this, which is also a jalapeno that is allowed to be fully ripened and turn red. Now, if you take this and you dry it and smoke it, or smoke it and dry it, it will become a chipotle pepper. So that is just a testament to the full wide spectrum of pepper flavors out there. Get out there, experiment, try them at different stages, and see which one you prefer. Most hot peppers tend to get a little bit fruitier when they turn red, so I highly encourage you to try them because they're actually really delicious. And not only are they delicious, but you can buy this at the grocery store. When it comes to harvesting cucumbers, at least the green ones, you have a really nice indicator for when they're actually peak in their flavor, not going to be bitter or too seedy. So Kevin's cucumber vine here has been producing like crazy, so I figured I'd come over here and grab a couple of these guys to show you what I'm looking at. Now, the main thing you want to look for is, first of all, if it's growing on the ground, it will have a field spot like this one here. So let's ignore that for now. But the main thing I'm looking for is, if you look at the blossom end, you can see how this one is starting to lose that dark green color. It's a little bit yellow, whereas this one is more uniform in shape, still dark green at the bottom. That is what you're looking for. Once the cucumber starts to lose that dark green color, become a little bit yellow, it's past its prime, it'll be more bitter and will very likely be full of many more seeds. So let's go ahead and cut these two open, and I'll show you just how different they are, even though they look fairly close in size. So now let's go ahead and cut these cucumbers open and see if indeed there is a major difference. So this is the one that I said was peak ripe, didn't have a lot of yellow streaks at the bottom. And indeed, the seeds look quite small, not really fully developed, which is exactly what we want to see. So here's the one that has some of that yellow streaking. And what you'll see is that overall, there is actually much more seed cavity. But not only that, you're starting to get some of these hollow spots in the seed cavity, like over here, which is much less pleasant to eat. So let me do another cross section across the middle here. And right there, you can see another difference is that over here, this has become sort of white and spongy, whereas on this cucumber, it's still nice and vibrant green, has that pale green color to it. This is going to taste much better than this one. So this tastes sweet and refreshing. So what am I noticing in the difference? Both of them are actually quite sweet. I don't really detect any bitterness, but this one has some crunch and snap to it, whereas this one is almost a little bit soft and mealy, closer to a melon than a nice crisp cucumber. So try to look for the darker ones that don't have any streaking of yellow. That's going to be your optimal cucumber for delicious flavor. The home gardener is truly a lucky cook because they have access to fresh, delicious aromatic herbs straight from the garden. But how do you ensure that those herbs have the peak flavor that will blow away whoever you are trying to impress with your cooking? Well, the step one is to not harvest them in the middle of the day. Really any time between like 10 and 7 o'clock. That intense sun, heat, and UV has been beating on your plants, and it's evaporating away all of those delicious essential oils. Those are the ones that give us the flavor that we are looking for. Now, of course, if you're cooking, it's the middle of the day, go out there, harvest your herbs. They're still going to taste leagues better than anything you get at the grocery store. But if you're trying to like really get the full flavor, or you're trying to preserve those herbs, the best time is to do it early in the morning before the sun really starts to cook your plants, or even late in the evening is okay, but morning is always going to be best if you want the maximum flavor out of your herbs, like this absolutely delicious Thai basil. And once your harvest is complete, it is time to enjoy your harvest. I got this watermelon that I stole from Kevin's house, nice and cooled off in the fridge. It's time to dive in and enjoy. Good luck in the garden, keep on growing, and may your harvest be as flavorful as this delicious watermelon. Perfection.